Good afternoon, buenos dias, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Brenda Miller and Marie Wade to discuss Telephone, Essays in Two Voices, published by our friends at the Cleveland State University Poetry Center. Brenda Miller's most recent book, A Braided Heart, Essays on Writing on Form, was published by University of Michigan Press in July 2021. She's the author of 5 more essay collections, including An Earlier Life, which received the Washington State Book Award for Memoir. Her poetry chapbook, The Daughters of Elderly Women, received the 2020 Floating Bridge Press Chapbook Award. Brenda's work has received 6 Pushcart Prizes, and she is also a professor of English at Western Washington University and associate faculty with the Rainer Writing Workshop. To moderate tonight's conversation, we are also joined by Julie Marie Wade, who is a member of the Creative Writing faculty at Florida International University, a winner of the Marie Alexander Poetry Series and the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Memoir. Her collections of poetry and prose include Wishbone, A Memoir in Fractures, Small Fires, Essays, Postage Due, Poems and Prose Poems, When I Was Straight, Same Sexy Marriage, a Novella and Poems, Just an Ordinary Woman Breathing, and Skirted. Wade reviews regularly for Lambda Literary Review. Throughout this afternoon's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of Telephone from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Saviana. Hi, Brenda. Hi, everyone watching at home. I just wanted to start by saying, since I'm the first reader of the day, or kicking off the collaborative reading today, that I met Brenda 19 years ago in the fall of 2002. Some of you already know this, in a class called the Graduate Lyric Essay Seminar at Western Washington University. It is a class that, began changing my literary life and continued to change my literary life forever. And I'm so excited that among all the wonderful people in this audience, I have students who are in my Graduate Lyric Essay Seminar, which is in so many ways inspired by yours. And so it feels like lyric essay lineage happening today. So I'm so glad that we wrote this book together, and I'm so glad that we get to share it with all of you.
Yeah, me too. Here's the book. It's a beautiful cover, Telephone Essays in Two Voices, and they're all collaborative essays that Julie and I wrote together, usually by going back and forth. And today we're reading the last real essay in the book, correct? Yeah.
We are. It's called Works in Progress. We thought it was a good length for this venue. And after we read, if you have questions, as you know, there's no chat, but there is a question box. So you can ask questions, and then I'll open up the box and we'll see what we can answer in the time that we have. So thank you for being here. Works in Progress. First draft. I remember my mother clearing the table, just as she always did. I remember my father opening the newspaper, which was long as a dress back then. His face and lap disappeared behind it. When my mother returned, she always had a project in hand, perhaps a needle and thread to sew a button back on an impish shirt, or perhaps her hot glue gun. Careful, don't touch. Poised like a trigger over any chip or crack. In our house, nothing stayed broken or disheveled for long. For dessert, familiar things, a pad of white pages with a coiled seam and a 2-story box of crayons. How I loved opening and closing that box along its cardboard hinge. The revelation each time of a stunning chorus of colors. Go ahead now, draw something, my mother said. She was a teacher, so she knew what children did. That night, I asked for a pencil instead. What do you need a pencil for? My mother inquired. There are her deep-set eyes, blue as the digits on the microwave clock, flickering with surprise. My father shifts on his wicker chair. The seams of his paper crinkle. The kitchen smells of meaty leftovers and a floral spray meant to disguise them. It doesn't. This is the first time I can see myself clearly in a memory. I'm 4 or 5, so tall for my age that my feet already scrape the floor when seated. I'm an early reader because my mother has taught me what the 26 glorious symbols mean, the sounds they make and the ways they play together. I can even see her desk in the corner, complete with a seashell box from which at least a dozen pencils protrude. All she has to do is reach behind her and hand me one, or grant me permission to rise. I remember the way my pulse climbs my neck like a ladder when I say it aloud. I want to write something, Mom.
Second draft. My mom has beautiful handwriting, a flow of lines as delicate as her fingers, small knuckles, slender nails, groomed. You just need to take your time, she says coolly, as if that's all it takes to be elegant. Even now, at age 86, her script remains the same, betraying no infirmity of age. My own handwriting is slipshod, a jerky amalgamation of printing and cursive, hardly intelligible even to my own eye. My father and I shared this affliction. When he was in the nursing home at the end, I found a slip of paper on which he'd practiced writing his own name over and over, trying to get it right. I wish I'd kept it, those earnest marks he left in his wake. But years before all that, when my parents are immortal, I sit in my bedroom, the door closed tight against the rest of the house. I don't yet understand the concept of family, how fragile it can be, how rare to be safely ensconced. Instead, I sit at my pink desk, stubbornly setting myself apart. I listen to the sprinklers doing their appointed rounds on the back lawn over and over, a rhythm that ticks, "You are here, you will always be here," in Morse code. I'm writing in my diary, a little book with lined pages and a tin lock, but I don't really have anything to say. All language seems to be a code I cannot break. So I write in large letters that refuse to stay aligned, all the annoyances I don't dare say aloud. I write indignantly that my father sucks his teeth too loudly after dinner. I write how unfair it is that I have to clear the table when my brothers get away scot-free. I write about my brothers, how uncouth they are, how they smell. All my lines are about feelings that make my skin itch and have nowhere else to go, feelings that are unacceptable. And this venting really doesn't help. I look out my window, see the way the heat rises in waves across the concrete, how water evaporates before it fully hits the ground. I close the little book and pretend to lock it with the ineffectual key.
Third draft. I have a red diary with a tiny gold key. I have a huge pink snail called a keeper, misspelled on purpose, because the shell is opened with a huge pink key. Sometimes I wear this key on a ribbon around my neck or tuck it inside the zippered pocket of my pillow. I want to have something worthy of a keeper, a secret important enough to stow away, to keep under lock and key. That's when I realize language has always been my secret. Some kids collect bottle caps or baseball cards or caterpillars in jam jars with holes poked through the top for air. Some collect more unusual things, like my friend who pilfers colored rubber bands, then sorts them all by hue. Someday she hopes to have enough for a full elastic rainbow. What I collect are words, invisible to everyone but me. But what if I got a concussion, say, or that amnesia so prevalent on daytime TV? My words would be lost without a breadcrumb trail. No one would even know that they were missing. So I take a piece of notebook paper and begin to inventory what is most important to me. First, the word itself in the left-hand margin, printed small enough so it barely touches the long red line. Then various meanings of the word as I have encountered them, strung together with semicolons that dangle like Christmas lights. Sometimes I use a word in a sentence, placing it between two parentheses. That's when I smile to myself and underline the parent, another part of my collection, these words within words, which lead by ellipses toward metaphors. How I, an only child, find myself perched between my parents on the sofa, parented, parenthetical, set apart inside the brackets of their bodies, but also aside, like something you say in a whisper, not meant for everyone to hear. I am my parents' whisper. It goes on like this, each word or symbol, which can also be spelled out as a word, opening into another and spiraling down, like the secret staircase behind bookshelves in old and haunted houses. I might, for instance, try the word key. Only 3 letters, but also 3 parts of speech. There are noun keys cut by a locksmith, made for opening locks on doors or books or snails. There are also map keys, which are nouns too, and sometimes referred to as a legend, a word that unfolds into its own treasure trove of meanings. But the key is made to help decode another kind of opening. And haven't I read in a book somewhere that key is a different name for island, or a kind of island in tropical places where coconuts bob along the waves? An adjective key could be a key decision, something essential, like me making this list to fold and stow in my keeper. Verb keys are all around us, the way my father keys data at work, punching numbers into a keyboard, which also has key in its name. And once my mother came home crying because someone had keyed her station wagon in a Safeway parking lot. Evidence of that keying, now and again, is with us for many years, a light scar on the dark paint, as if a surgeon had made an incision.
4th draft. No surgeon, no incisions, just my friend laboring in the little round shack on the hill. No plumbing, no anesthesia. We're breathing together as she bears down. All the glass jars labeled and aligned on her handmade shelves. Wood floor mopped, counters scrubbed. Wavy glass painting the windows, barely holding back the night. Rug covered with a sheet. Her body seems all belly now, ready to burst. The midwife says, anytime now, you can push. Her husband hovers behind her, and she leans into him, though she has just discovered he's been having a secret rendezvous in the city. But all that lies in wait. The dissolution of a marriage, solo life with baby, endless laundry runs into town, nights walking her son in a stroller across the bridge over and over until he falls asleep. For now, she still has to rely on him and on me, the 2 of us propping her up, the 2 of us woefully inadequate to the task. We're only human, and this endeavor seems to require a power that is more than human. We've entered the realm of exhaustion that paradoxically feels amphetaminic, dawn appearing in the canopy just as the baby crowns. She screams and he slithers out of her, trailing the umbilical cord. I hold him just a few minutes later, his eyes open, but still in the other world. He smells of blood and the sea. A thick warmth blurs his face, which every second becomes more human. No, a hollow echo. Stay unformed, not ours, for just a little while longer. When I try to write about this moment weeks later, I hear my pen scratch across the page as I cross out and cross out. Language, even with all its nuance, does not seem up to this particular command. Each stroke's a nick, an abrasion, trying to scrape off the layers of the already known, but I can't get below the epidermal layer. I'm covered in scratches, small flesh wounds that will take forever to heal.
Fifth draft. The doctor says once, then repeats slowly. Remember that healing is a process, not a deadline. I sit propped in an L shape on the table, my broken leg freed from its cast, only to be confined anew inside a knee-high walking boot. You know, as a child, I wasn't allowed to have shoes with Velcro, I tell him, fingering the 6 places where I'll cinch the boot tight, secure it in place with the fuzzy fasteners. It's ironic that something like this had to happen before I ever gave up my laces. Dr. Knight is my junior by a couple of years and resembles one of those unobjectionably good-looking catalog men my mother hoped I would marry. Clean-shaven, square jaw, broad shoulders that strain against his narrow white coat. His eyes widen when I speak, as if trying to discern why I tell him things that aren't germane to my medical history. Are you experiencing any pain? He asks. I shake my head. Nothing physical. It pains me, though, that I can't run or spin or even trust myself to take the stairs on crutches. All in good time, he says, scribbling something in his notes, then closing the metal cover of his clipboard. I really like your notepad there, I gesture. Good waterproofing. Do you have to be a doctor to get one of those? Dr. Knight cocks his head, regards me with a look I've seen before. The "are you for real, is that a serious question" expression. Honestly, I don't remember where this came from. It's just what I've always used. He shakes my hand and heads for the door. Soon a young nurse arrives, nodding shyly as she tucks thin sprigs of white blonde hair behind her ears. Her task is to show me how to wash my post-surgery wounds. Be friends with the sterile gauzes, she says. And since English is not her first language, I lean in, listening more closely. Gently, with peroxide, spraying both sides. See how the scar shape is like interrupted smile. Go the whole way. Spray the whole smile. I reach now for the steno book in my bag. Nadia thinks I'm taking notes on wound care, but that's only half true. I want to write about what has happened, the way sudden immobility alters our relationship to space, and more than space, to our bodies, to our lovers' bodies, to our most basic kinds of mastery, and our deepest mortal fears. But how will I find the words to explain what I'm learning, and then push further, to conjure that experience for someone who has never stood one moment and collapsed the next, skidding on slick tile over a ledge of concrete, the tibia and fibula severed the second they hit the ground. Nadia touches my wrist with her cool, thin hand. Funny, no? They call it walking boots, but you will not be walking. I laugh and nod. Language is funny, is imprecise no matter how long you speak it, how long you study, no matter how much practice you have writing it down. No weight to bear, she says, as she begins to wrap my foot with gauze. But it is heavy too, lugging the leg. We say no weight bear, but we mean not pushing down. I'm sorry to say, it is a lot to carry, after all.
Sixth draft. We are not the ones to carry my father's casket. Most of the weight, anyway, would not be him, not his body, which has already been lightened into dust by the coma in the end. The casket arrives before us, sitting on its casters above the open ground. 2 Navy officers stand at attention, stationed head and foot throughout the service, backs straight, unmoving. My brother's written a eulogy that makes everyone laugh. I sing a song, handing out copies of the music, hoping I'm on key, gesturing for others to join me. They do. The words, "May eternal light surround you," warbling toward the grave. But I'm more concerned about getting it right, the notes, the words, the intervals. So I'm not sure I'm even really singing to my father or to what is left of him. A 7-gun salute happens somewhere in between the rabbi's sermon and the lowering of the coffin. I help my mother shovel the first scoop of dirt, and then we all follow suit, wet earth landing with thumps on the lid. A flock of crows whirls up in the far trees, cawing for attention. We want to take it as a sign of something, but their language remains inscrutable. One of my friends eschews the shovel and tosses in the earth with her bare hands. Some of us join in, the dirt sticking to our palms. At some point, I say to whoever is near me, "That was fun, and I don't know what I mean. I can't take it back." The word detonated in the graveyard. My friends are here, some colleagues I didn't expect, my brothers and their children. Even the receptionist from the nursing home has come to see my father off. My hands are dirty. I'm a little giddy. For years after, I'll try to see this moment clearly. I'll recall snippets of black cloth, a single crow, wet earth in my palms, a white tent, rifle shots reverberating across the cemetery, the dog jumping out of my mother's arms. I'll want to revise it all, rewind, start another draft, but this version writes itself in stone.
7th draft. I always wanted to write something in wet cement, something that couldn't be revised, then perch on the curb or the playground fence, watching my bold inscription dry. But what would I write? Which combination of words should I choose to immortalize? "Stop overthinking it," all the kids jeered. "Just grab a stick and print Julie was here." We wrote our names in sand so often, sometimes encased in hearts or balloons, then waited for the tide to erase them. I liked that it was temporary, each day's blemished dune, how soon the smooth face of perpetual nothing reappeared along the shore. Parents leave their mark on you when they give you a name, but I want to leave a mark that's all my own. "So have a baby," April laughed. She was crimping her hair. She was cavalier. She might as well have suggested a milkshake or a trip to the mall. You can put something really awesome on the birth certificate, like "Baby Slurpee Jesus" or "Seymour Butts." Years in the future, contentedly childless, I write and deliver a eulogy for a different friend. Bob collaborates with me until the week before his death, when the cancer climbs his throat, renders him fully mute. "Read your poem, too," he made me promise, "the one with the goddamn in it. I want these Catholic fools to know I went to my grave an atheist." He scribbled his epitaph on a legal pad. I meant what I said. Then he remembered and threw up his hands. They don't give you a stone if you're getting burned up, do they? Once I wrote 2 sets of wedding vows, the first to the man I didn't marry, the second to the woman I did. They float in memory now like long-tailed kites. One small diamond of misplaced devotion caught in a tree, fodder for nesting birds. Another bright and box-shaped, a swirl with rainbows stretching skyward above the raucous surf. Once I worked in an office with these words carved in the wall: "This sentence is not true." I traced them with my finger every day for years, never venturing to contradict or concur. Once I saw a giant stone rising out of the waves in Maine. The engraving, preposterously large, proclaimed, "Not art." How could I argue or agree? Now on South Beach, an artist has commissioned a poetry rail, 12 poems permanently etched in metal using water jets. I am asked to contribute something. Even when we're all underwater, a new friend chirps, your poem will be preserved forever. No pressure at all. I reach back to everything I know about my life. Griefs as inexpressible as joys, language necessary and futile at once, and then to those first words nested inside each other. I submit grammar. Here on the Atlantic, sunrise, the reversed syntax of my Seattle youth. I marvel, still young, at what it means to have been younger, to see at last the parent in parenthesis, to read for the first time whole chapters of my life as an aside.
Final draft. Put them aside for now. Whole chapters you want to reread now that you know how the story ends. You used to do that all the time. Close a book, hold it to your chest, then open to the title page, the table of contents, even the blank sheet that told you to pause a moment before embarking. You ran your hand across the type, knowledge crackling in your fingertips. A book read seems heavier than a book unread, as if your gaze, your attention could be measured in ounces. Once, for Father's Day, I sewed my father a tie. I didn't know how to sew. He didn't need a tie. I chose a silky navy blue that was difficult to work through the machine. I was 12 years old. My body had become something not ugly exactly, but ungainly, all arm and leg and sharp pelvic bone. I folded and tacked and sewed uneven seams, wrapped the whole thing in tissue paper. I can't remember his face when he opened it, or if he even pretended to put it on. I remember only the sewing, each wrong stitch begetting another. Before his last gurgled breath, before the hospice nurse said, "There's no radial pulse," before the shutting down and shutting off, before all his body heat compressed in his heart, before I cupped my hand and said, "Your family loves you," before the inhale without an exhale. My mother and I watched him, hypnotized, the way one might watch a baby sleep. The room was too cold, and we huddled together under a blanket, not knowing we could ask for the heat to be turned up. We accepted whatever was offered us. He died at 3:45 a.m. The night crackled around us as we waited for the mortician to arrive. We sat in the family room at Hospice House, and I began to write his obituary. I tried to get beyond mere fact, to distill into the narrow column what can be known about a life. But I kept thinking about an early memory, one that won't be recorded, of flying a kite on the cul-de-sac of my childhood home. I see my dad there behind the video cam, coaxing me to smile. I can see the heavy camera on his shoulder, one eye shut, lips parted as he concentrates on his sullen daughter. It's a cloudy day, and I'm wearing a coat that makes it difficult to move. That girl, she wants to be lighthearted for him. She wants to enjoy the tug of a kite as it grapples with the air. Her father says, "Start running, it will lift." But she doesn't want this responsibility to be a tether for something that insists on flying away. She freezes on the spot and refuses to meet her father's gaze, scowls while the string goes limp in her hand. and it will be written like this forever. Afraid of holding on, afraid of letting go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. It was really moving. We had to practice reading that alone, and now to hear it together, it was really special for me to hear you read.
I think that's the first time I've read that out loud, maybe.
Maybe so. Yeah. And together in some sense.
Well, and it's so interesting reading together now. I'm hearing so many more echoes. I mean, there were some that were, of course, deliberate that I'm sure the audience heard, but others that were much more organic, and I don't remember intentionally, like the kite imagery, right? I don't remember that being like, oh, I'm going to bring in a kite again. And instead, these echoes kind of organically emerge throughout the piece.
The key, you gave me the key at the beginning, and then the key comes back later in your ribbon. Wow. Oh, I just opened up the box, and I hope, Ron, I hope the subtitles were turned on for you. I know the chat was disabled, but there was a question about that, which I didn't see until now. And then there's a number of questions, which we'll try to get to. This question's from Brian. Hi, Brian. I'm always fascinated that listening to your work always fixes a writing issue that I'm having. Wow, that's awesome. What advice might you have for weaving details smoothly throughout an essay or story's narrative? I guess that's kind of what we're talking about. Do you have advice, Brenda?
I'd say that what I'm doing, and especially when I'm writing in collaboration, it allows me to kind of more fully re-inhabit a memory rather than write about it, if that makes sense. So when you're re-inhabiting it, you're really setting yourself in that moment. And even if you're not completely sure of all those details, you can still call them up in your imagination, like the jars in my friend's hippie house. And, you know, it's what would have been there approximately, right? And so by placing yourself there, then the detail, and you get practice at this, the more you do it, right? The details kind of naturally arise. And I always err on the side of overwriting so that then I can prune it back and see what the scene is really about, what it's really doing for the whole piece. Because I think we did quite a bit of editing on this one, didn't we, Julie?
I'm trying to remember. I was thinking about all of these pieces separately, and we probably did. I mean, we did a lot of editing, even like as we were sending back and forth to each other. Like I can remember us sending another, like, wait, I added to mine, or I took something out, or, you know, quick tinker. But I think that's really good advice about let yourself overwrite something, because it's a lot harder to like pull more out of yourself later. Like if your editor comes along, or, you know, you're trying to revise and someone is saying like, there's not enough here, it's harder to get more out of yourself at a later time than it might be to just have a deluge on the page at the beginning and then do the pruning. It's like topiary. You start to, you know, make the shape, but you get all the details that you can down. And it does tend to happen organically over time. Like as you reread your work, or reading with someone even, or reading to someone, you start to hear, oh, that's a link, or that could be a link to an earlier detail, so that it doesn't feel forced. It feels kind of like what the piece is calling for, I think.
Yeah. And I was hearing, I think in a lot of those scenes we read, they're in the present tense. And so that can be something that also helps to draw forth detail, because past tense can lead to summarizing. Not always, but it can. Yes. And present tense, it's much harder to summarize. And so you kind of are moving through it in real time, right? And again, you can always go back and put it into past tense if you don't like the tone of the present. But writing it in that way will often lead to more material that you can use.
That's really good advice. I know Brian also writes fiction, but I think for essay and story, both, like present tense, whether you keep it in present tense or not, it really does make it feel active and immediate, and you'll get more on the page faster. At least that would be true for me. Though if the content is really, you know, difficult, or you're struggling with the emotional nature of it, sometimes I do tinker with third person for autobiographical, you know, content, just because you can put yourself on the page and have that person and narrate what that person is doing or experiencing, and then you can just go back and switch, you know, all the she, they, he pronouns can just suddenly become I's, and you can make that turn. But it can help to feel almost like, you know, Ariel and omniscient over yourself in a way that at least I never feel when I'm living my life. So it gives me that vantage. So sometimes I do that if I feel stuck.
Yeah,
it can help a lot.
It really hit my ear as I was reading that last section aloud, how I made a really quick swerve into third person at the end, that girl. Right.
Yes, you did it. The ecstatic outside yourself.
Yeah, because I think I was an I up until then. And then it's like that girl, you know, so all of a sudden I've created this moment. And now as the writer, I'm looking back on it with a certain kind of understanding or meaning that I'm creating in, you know, afterwards. It wasn't there when I was experiencing it. And so just making that move does something for me as a writer, but I think also for the reader, gives you a kind of a wider, maybe like a wide angle lens on it.
And then like, I felt like I was standing there on the edge of the page with, you know, adult writer Brenda, but like that we were both watching a little film. Like I could almost picture it like, you know, on grainy, older, like camcorder filming, like, I mean, I don't know that anybody was there, but like to film it, but it felt like we were watching it, though the prose was very clear, but that feeling of like watching the father and daughter together. And it felt intimate. Like I was involved with the adult Brenda watching that memory, which I like when points of view do swerve a little bit. It's exciting. It keeps it interesting. Oh, Lenny. Hi, Lenny. Well, this question applies to both of us too, Brenda, because you are also a poet. And Lenny wants to know if we find it more difficult or challenging to write poems or essays, or maybe like how are each uniquely difficult? I don't know. I haven't thought about that specifically before. What do you think?
Well, I started as a poet way back when, in high school. I was a poet and very earnest, writing my poetry, but I was never that good at it. And then the personal essay just really allowed me to develop and my voice, and I felt more comfortable in that form. But then actually during this time period I was writing about in this essay, when my father was dying and in the aftermath, I just couldn't write a sentence. So I went back to poetry, and I wouldn't say it was difficult at all. I mean, it's kind of freeing, I think, to allow yourself to move between genres and just kind of keep things fresh. Yeah. And Julie, I think you've always been both, haven't you?
Wow, I'd love to claim that. I've always been both. I would love to be a, you know, like a multi-genreist through and through from the start. I hope that that's true, but I guess I just always really brazenly claimed that I was a poet my whole life, but I really wasn't writing a lot of poems until graduate school. I was mostly writing a lot of prose, but just insisting that I was a poet because it felt like the sensibility behind the prose was a poem. But for some reason, it was always in sentences and paragraphs. And so then when I got to graduate school, I took lyric essay with you. Of course, it opened a door and it made me think like, oh, that's what's happening here. And in some ways, taking the lyric essay, where it was like, oh, poetic prose is a thing, and it's a particular kind of thing within this larger arena of prose or creative nonfictive prose. In some ways, I think that really helped me get a handle on poetry, because I think my early poetry, you know, was fairly disastrous, but very eager. And so after taking lyric essay, where I could sort of see, it's odd now because so much of what I write and what I want to write is hybrid, but it was like I needed to see them separately more clearly so that then I could get to the places where they kind of mesh and overlap and become hybrid. So lyric essay it solves a world of issues, and it also opens up, you know, a lot of new doors that are still challenging to walk through, but it clarified poetry for me as something a little bit different.
Yeah, and these kinds of essays. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a celebration here. Comment from Jane Wong. What was the most surprising discovery in your collaboration? But she's also saying, congrats to you both and go Brenda, which is awesome.
Jane. Thank you, Jane. Well, I was just going to say about lyric essay, it does demand a different kind of reader too, reading stance, because you're in most lyric essays, you're not going from point A to point B in a straightforward way. And so it does work more like poetry. And you probably heard in our essay here that we're, picking up on lines, we're picking up on words and weaving them through. So having that kind of formal structure is very much like poetry as well. So what was Jane asking? I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. Yeah, we could go on about poetry and creative nonfiction and lyric essay forever. But I think this is a great question too. What was the most surprising discovery in your collaboration?
Oh, how much we could write so quickly. Well, mainly that's you, Julie. I mean, because Julie, as many of you probably know, is a hugely prolific and fast writer, even if she's writing an email or a text. And so when we would get going on a new essay, because she's 3 hours ahead of me, often Julie would start it off, or I'd be responding to something she had written earlier that day as soon as I got up. And there was just so much momentum to it, right? And to just be able to like slip right into this writing voice and have accountability, have validity, have all of those things spurring you on. It never felt like work. It was just so much fun. Even writing really heavy stuff as we did, it always just felt like, wow. And it really felt like it was coming from a different place than me or you. And that's why we don't label the speakers, really, is because it is even if it's my words I'm writing, they're not mine. They come out of this pairing of energy.
That's true. That's really true. I like that pairings of energy. I mean, I think that the surprising discoveries were, have been, and I think they will continue to be, just relentless, because it's like it fuels one of the things that all of you who are writers, I'm sure, but not just writers, like our human curiosity, right? We are driven by that. So when somebody is going to send you something back and you're waiting for it, it's like this excitement. It's like you're getting a present every time in your inbox. And, Brenda was in Washington, I was in Florida the whole time we were writing this book. And so it was always, you didn't really know, like sometimes the other person's sleeping, or you don't know when they're going to wake up or when they're going to have time, because they're also teaching and doing other things, like to send you something. But once you get it, like you want to drop everything and open it, because that's your cue. Like you're not going to write the next thing until you read that. And everything that you're going to write is directly connected to what they sent you, but you have no idea what it is. So, I mean, that's just kind of thrilling all the time. I mean, not that I'm saying I know when I'm just writing by myself either, but there's something so different about that. Like you're going to give me a gift and it's going to help me see where to go next.
Yeah.
It's thrilling. Deborah, I think you've met Deborah Dean, my colleague at FIU and my friend. The subheadings here are drafts. I think of drafts as revision, but clearly that's not what's happening here. I'd like to hear you both talk about the process of writing these, and then P.S. lovely moving. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. So this is a more recent essay, as I'm recalling, in the sequence of writing this book, right? I mean, I think probably start to finish, we took maybe 2 years-ish, like 2015 to 2017, to write the bulk of the content. And then the epilogue is Letters from Isolation, which were exchanged in 2020, actually after we knew the book would be published, but before it was. And so it's like a little bit of a moving forward. But do you remember the process of writing this and how we came to the drafts?
A lot of the essays, the forms they take, mimic the content. And so it's always hard to remember, but we did want to write about writing. And so I was like, let's just do it in drafts. But then it becomes like, I know what you mean, what, drafts are about. I'm going to keep revising this and revising the writing. But I think the draft headings in this essay mean the drafts of our lives and the different ways you redraft your life over and over as you continue on and have new perspectives.
Good answer. I want that to be my answer too. I think it is. It feels like, the subject of impermanence keeps coming up, and the sense of like, how can we put anything down that we really can keep there forever? Like, what's going to go on, what's going to be an epitaph, what's going to be, in wet cement, what's going to be like, how how do you commit to something staying solid in words, and language is so slippery and elusive, but then life is also slippery and elusive. So I think it is about redrafting and reinventing ourselves. And I love that you, like when we started, it had that deceptive chronological movement where there's clearly like a very, very young me, like 4 or 5, early memory. And then there's a young-ish Brenda, like maybe kind of like on the cusp preteen Brenda, and then we swerve with time and we leap forward, and there's adult us, and then there's also at the end child you. So I love that it can be achronological, and that the themes or the imagery or kind of the driving questions can move us around, and that also feels like just a lyric essay permission, like something in lyric essays that we get to do. And I should say my students are working on meta lyric essays right now, or like lyric essays on the lyric essay. So in a sense, this is one of those.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And to the question about revising, I mean, I'm sure that we revised, but it's hard to remember now because I think a lot of it just kind of stayed the way it was until we got into production with the press, and then they did a lot of editing.
They did.
Really good editing. I was like, oh, okay. You know, because you do get attached to certain things. And, but in terms of our own, like we rarely commented on each other's sections, maybe just a line or two here or there. But for the most part, they pretty much stayed, except for the one, there's a few essays that are in the form of an index, say, or a catalog. And in that case, we would rearrange to be alphabetical order. And so it's not clear. It's not just the back and forth. And so once we put it in that order, we might see things we wanted to highlight or edit out or revise. Yeah.
I love that too, because those essays, which I mean, they look different on the page, right? They have an indexical kind of format, but those are fun because when you reorder like alphabetically, I mean, that's a form, right? But it introduces chance, because you don't know, like when we were writing them, we were writing maybe the ones that we wanted to write, like out of the list, we were just picking and choosing, and oh, you wrote that, so I'm going to write this, but then you didn't know where they were going to end up when you changed the order. And so sometimes these really just surprising serendipities happen where two entries get juxtaposed that you would not have thought to put them together, but then they end up together by chance. And that's the the aleatoric element, and I love that. So lots of cool discoveries. back to Jane Wong. Oh, Randon, hello, Randon. She says, "What a wonderful reading! Thank you both so much. Can you talk a little bit about where the idea for this book came from?" I bet we can, and how more specifically you collaborated. Was it kind of call and response, reading and riffing, Marco Polo? I love that. We should do that. Something else entirely. However it happened, I love the results. Well, thank you. The idea for the book, that I mean, it was yours, even though we didn't really know it was a book at the time. But do you want to tell the story? I'm always telling this story.
Oh, well, we were in Tacoma at PLU teaching together, and we hadn't seen each other in a long, long time. And it's just always fun to be with Julie. It's just like with the writing, it's just like there's so much energy there. And somehow we got on the topic of phones. I don't remember how, but we were looking at our phones, or someone was calling us or something, and just like reminiscing about old phones and phones of our childhood. And so, well, let's write an essay about that. And I think I had done a few collaborations before then. I've collaborated on the textbook with Suzanne, and on a book on writing with Holly Hughes, and I worked with my friend Lee on collaborations. I just really enjoyed that process. So since we were going to write about telephones, I suggested that we do it as a game of telephone. And so that game where one person says a message or a line, and it goes through several ears and mouths until the end, and it's usually kind of garbled by then. And so our rule, our formal rule, was to take the last line of the other person's section and rearrange, which we kind of did in the one we just read too. And so there's that real kind of stitching together. And it also gives you a place to start that might lead you in different directions. And so we did it. I mean, and I think you started when you got home. I don't think we did it there. But yes, and I was so surprised because Julie, the first the first section of that one is all about Elijah Gray, who was kind of the unsung hero of telephones, and all this like imaginative research about this guy. And I'm like, oh my God, what am
I went home and I was just nervous because if you think about, like, you know, you were my teacher like about 13 years before that, and I'd known you as a friend for a long time, but I still felt like, oh, I'm going to write with Brenda Miller. Like, it felt big. It felt like, you know, a big passing the torch moment. And so I was like, this better be really, really good. It better be something. But I wanted it to feel like, something you could take anywhere, which is like the gift of collaboration. And so, and it introduced research into our book, which we didn't know we were writing a book then, but that's something that comes up a lot now. Like, I'm seeing so many lyric essay collections that I love. Last week, my students and I were looking at Sean Wen's A 20-Minute Silence Followed by Applause, and just the amount of research that goes into a lot of lyric essay collections. And I think sometimes we don't even talk about that. We think lyric essay collections might be always just a different way of approaching memoir, and so many great lyric essay collections are, but there's also, so we have a lot of research in telephone and in camera, which came next, and you know, just new things, toys. Oh my goodness, toys, which was also Brenda's idea. And we used the National Toy Hall of Fame to answer a call for submissions from Creative Nonfiction, the literary magazine, because they were putting together a unit, or not a unit, that's teaching, a special issue on childhood. And Brenda was like, let's do toys. And we knew that their aesthetic as a magazine was more about having a clear line of research. So then we were like, we know how to do this. We've been doing research. We can do this. And it was fascinating to learn a lot about what gets toys inducted into the Hall of Fame. So you're learning and you're reading, and then you're finding out if any of your childhood toys have been inducted. And if they haven't, like, why have they not? And that was one of also really a joyful essay to write. And I think it ended up on some standardized tests somewhere. So that was also really cool. It became a test question. So how about that? That was really also exciting and strange. Oh my goodness, there's so many things I want to get to before the time runs out. Miriam says, what is your collaboration process? Oh, that's good. We've been addressing that. The essay is so seamless and beautiful. Thank you. Denise says, wonderful reading, Julie and Brenda. Brenda, since you literally wrote the book on CNF, Tell It Slant, which you did, can you talk about the recent history of CNF as a genre? That is beautiful.
I don't know if we have time for that. That's a good question.
We might say whatever you can in the time we have.
Well, it's interesting because I'm just seeing more and more hybrid work that is refusing to be slotted into, this is nonfiction, this is poetry, this is, you know, just really exciting new experimental work is happening now, including collaboration, right? Yeah.
Well, that's perfectly. We know we're supposed to be wrapping up around 4:55, but this leads into a group of my students who are having a watch party right now at FIU, which is so sweet. So on behalf of them, Halsey is writing, and we have Ronnie and Celeste and Lisa and Arnaldo, Trey, Yale, Brittany. They're all there, and they said that I've encouraged them in class to write collaboratively with their peers, which I have indeed, and like I do with Brenda and Denise, True, and others. For those of us who haven't ventured into that endeavor, this is kind of a perfect last question. How would we suggest beginning collaborative writing for new collaborators?
Just do it. Just do it.
That's the best advice. That's the swoosh. But really, I mean, that is true. Like, if we had so much fun talking about telephones that day, and the nostalgia of how a phone means something different to a new generation than it does to us, and all of that. But if it had just stayed in that conversation in the coffee shop, you know, like, then we wouldn't have written this book, right? Because we needed to write the one to keep writing. And there is that momentum that Brenda mentioned. I do think you can, read Denise Duhamel and Maureen Seaton's 10 Rules on Collaboration, which is just a short little beautiful statement, and it's available online, and it will give you it has great suggestions that are funny, but they're also true. Like, you know, make agreements that you'll like let each other eat and sleep when you need to. It's kind of written about also when you're writing in the same space. But trust your collaborators is a big message in their statement. And I think you have to trust someone to write with them. And you have to trust, like, if they're going to send you something about Elisha Gray and the telephone, like you have to trust, like I'll work with this. So it is kind of, as Denise always says, a yes and. Whatever they do, you're up for it, and you can pivot it and you can volta it all you want, but you gotta do it, because it's really fun to talk about, but you just got to do it. You got to try.
Yeah, the yes and of improv, right? That's the kind of note, right? And that is very much the energy of a collaboration. So, and not all of them will work. You might try with someone and it doesn't really go anywhere, and that's okay. It doesn't, it's okay. And sometimes we would write essays that didn't end up working as collaborations, and we would take back our own writing that we did for it and publish them separately. But I still consider it, those words wouldn't have been written without that assignment, from the other. And once we wrote one about the experience of pain, and it's never, I can't quite pinpoint when one isn't working, but it's usually when it just feels so tied to one voice and another voice. So we took ours back. We each wrote our own pain piece from the sections we'd already written. But then we were able to get them published together like a duet in River Teeth. So that was really fun, right? So there's all different ways to think about it. You might do a collaboration where you don't ever try to mesh the two, right? Maybe the collaboration is all about generating your own work.
Absolutely. You get to make the rules. So it might help, especially if you're just starting and you don't know, this person, but you don't necessarily know them on the page in the same way. You could set a rule, and it could be anything. It could be write until it feels finished and pass to the next person. Or it could be sometimes, I don't think I did this with you, Brenda, but with Denise, we used we want to have an essay where every entry that we write is 100 words, no more, no less, or 200 or 250, like to vary length, but to have a very fixed. So it's actually not varying length in the course of the essay, but it makes, it's a different experience to read like 100 words that are a set versus like 250 words. That's a more kind of, sprawling entry. And so if you set some kind of rule for yourself, even if you end up breaking it later, it can be comforting to have that. Just like if you write a formal poem, there is comfort in the rhyme scheme or the meter, or this is only 14 lines, it won't kill me, any way that you want to start imposing some rules to start. And Brenda has an essay I really love called Pantoum. Is it Pantoum for 1979? And it's a prose pantoum. And even though it's not a collaboration, it is like using the form of the poem pantoum, but in the form of lyric prose. So you can also, adopt forms, hermit crab shell forms of all kinds, but even borrow from poetry if you are poets who are collaborating, and take one of those forms and see what you could generate together. I know that there are more questions, but I also know Sabiana said we should wrap up around 4:55. I guess I can read. There's a question from Bruce and Suzanne. There's so much coherence, not just in imagery or subject, but also thematically. How did y'all coordinate thematically? And also, how did you decide when one of you had reached the essay's ending? How did we do that?
It's kind of like ringing a bell, right? You just feel it, you hear it in the end. Yeah. Sometimes we might not know, maybe we're just tired of writing. But yeah, usually, what do you think, Julie? Didn't it seem pretty clear when we'd reached the ending point?
Yeah, I think like you're emailing. this is just how we collaborated. You can do it however you want, but it was, emailing a draft back and forth. And so, you have the inbox, which is separate from the attachment, right? So you can say something like, hey, Brenda, I kind of feel like this might be my last entry, or this might be the penultimate entry. Do you feel like this is a point to close this out? Or do you think we have more to go? So you can it's like you're sidebarring the whole time about the essay that you're writing, which I guess we should do with ourselves while we're writing too, like that sidebar, but we don't always think to do that with ourselves. And so at least not explicitly. And so this was like, we could say that, like, well, what do you think? Or I think you're really good at finding that moment where like, nope, I think we got to take this back. And these are now our own pieces. And so like just another person who is actively involved in the collaboration telling you, here's what I think. And then you can have a conversation about that. It's not as if collaborating means we can never speak outside the page, right? Like we can keep speaking outside the page all the time as much as we want. And I think that really helps. It's like a good check-in.
Right. Yeah. And when we first started collaborating, we just wanted to keep doing it all the time. Like we'd finish one, and it's like, oh, when's the next one? There was just so much energy to it, and it was really the only writing I was doing. So, just the playfulness of it, the fun, and I can't say that we organized thematically around what we were writing. It was just whatever would come up through the imagery. The topics we'd come up with. We had like a whole list of them. We had one like sandwiches. And
yes, it's not in this book, but I love that essay. Whatever happened to that essay? It's out there somewhere.
Sandwiches. We have exercise. Just weird thing. Just something that would pop into your head. And of course, not all of them happen, but Julie would often like, let's write the sandwich one. She'd be like, I have nothing to say about sandwiches.
And then I sent you something about sandwiches, and guess what? Brenda had something to say about sandwiches. I mean, I maybe was just really hungry, but I really wanted to write about sandwiches, and it became massive. And it wasn't in here, but that's the thing. Like someone now also had asked a question about, did you set out to write a book together, or did this just start to shape itself into a book? And we definitely didn't set out to write a book. Like we didn't know that, it was that momentum and, oh, let's do this and let's do this. But I do always think that in a poem or in a lyric essay, there is something that you leave for yourself that's for the next one. It could genre hop too. It's not like every poem contains an arrow to the next poem. It might be an arrow to the next lyric essay, but it does feel like we were leaving each other, a breadcrumb trail of sorts. Like, oh, because we wrote telephone, we ended up writing camera, which was another object that had changed so much since we were younger. And, now what a camera means is usually your phone. So we wanted to get back to some of the primary objects, and then, things pivoted as we went, but each one kind of led to the next topic. And Brenda's right. We did always kind of specify, like, this is the topic. And sometimes the topic just became the title. Or sometimes like that cars. Evolved.
Yeah, we have one.
Cars. Yes.
And it's a long one. I don't know. Well, and the rule for that one was we just asked each other a question at the end that you answer.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, the editors of the book took those questions out, which I resisted mightily. And I'm still not sure why they're out. But anyway, once you end your collaboration with your collaborator, then you have to collaborate with another whole set of people.
That's completely true. I couldn't remember. I had to look it up to see where we settled on that, because, you dialogue with editors, and you sometimes say, like, I can't live without this. And they say, okay, but give me this instead. And so you're right. The questions are gone. And sometimes I miss them.
They still inform what happens later. Right. So, and so it's really interesting too, writing this kind of work, because I didn't think anyone would want to publish it. I mean, it's so weird, and there's not one author and you don't know who's talking when. And, it's a challenge for the reader, but a lot of them found homes individually. And then it was just such a miracle to me that the book happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's often how it is, I think.
Yeah.
It really was not our intention to write a book, and then we really couldn't not write a book, I think, at a certain point. And I feel like we'll write another one. It'll just happen. We will. We can't stop. There's also, that was a question. So I think we kind of did answer that. Did you set out to write a book together? That was from Marianne. Or did this just start to shape itself into a book? That one. Thank you so much for this. This is from Susan. Such beautiful work. It is fascinating to hear about your process and how generative it proved for both of you. A friend and I had a similar exchange a few years ago. It didn't result in a wonderful book yet. I'm glad that there's a yet there, but we're eager to give it another try and deepen the practice. Well, that's wonderful. Maybe that's why, part of collaboration is also inviting other people to do it. I always feel like lyric essay collections in particular have just boundless invitations and permissions. So there is a readership for collaborative writing. That's the good news. And so you can be part of it.
Yeah.
And that was the last question in the box. I always wonder, I was worried, what if nobody asks a question? What will happen? But you all ask questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for asking them.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, we appreciate you so much.
Thank you both for this conversation and for doing this event with Books and Books today. It was so interesting to listen to, and it was so great, and so many questions. Loved it so much. So thank you everyone for joining today. And don't forget that you can buy a copy of Telephone from Books and Books' website if you press the screen button or go to our website or come into stores. And don't forget to support your local indie bookstores during this time. And thank you everyone for joining. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Saviana. Bye.
Bye.